I moved to South Korea for university when I turned 18. I'm now 21, and this happened a little over 2 years ago. Whilst there's definitely been unwanted attention from some guys in the past, most of them get the message that I'm not interested. This, however, was a little more unsettling. The university I go to has an institute for language, which is where all of my classes were at the time, and it's pretty common knowledge that most foreigners in this part of Korea would know if or study at this institute. It's not abnormal for me to receive random Facebook friend requests from guys wanting to learn English or make foreign friends. Most of the time I just ignore them, unless we have a few mutual friends or I've met them before. I got a friend request from this guy named Nico, and we had quite a handful of mutual friends, and he'd messaged me too saying he was sorry for the randomness of the request, but he was trying to make as many foreign friends as he could. I thought, what the heck, and I accepted and messaged him back saying it was no bother. From what I could tell by his Facebook photos, he was a heavily pierced and tattooed man, and stated that he was Japanese, but had studied in Canada and could speak good English, and was also a foreigner studying at my university. After a few days, he messaged me again, and I replied. It was casual conversation, and would often bring up maybe meeting for a coffee or a movie, which I declined, until he started getting more aggressive for no reason. Every time I'd make a comment, he'd find some way to turn it into an argument, which grew tiring super fast, so I just ignored him. He'd often ask if I had a boyfriend, to which I'd reply no, and he'd bluntly say that we should be together. It was at this point where I decided I didn't really want anything to do with him, so I politely declined on the basis that I didn't know him, we'd never met, and we hadn't even known each other for a week. He didn't take my refusal well, and began throwing insults at me based on my looks, and saying overly graphic things that he'd do to me if he ever saw me. Apparently, I was being stupid enough not to take him up on the offer, because I'd never do better than him, and he'd make me see that. It creeped me out beyond belief, so I just blocked and deleted him on Facebook, and tried my best to forget about it. I mentioned it to a friend of mine, and she immediately knew exactly who I was talking about. Apparently, I was not the first girl he'd added on Facebook and tried to bully into meeting him and being his girlfriend. After asking a few more of my friends who we'd had as mutual friends on Facebook, they all described pretty similar situations involving Nico. One girl even told me that she'd given him the benefit of the doubt and met with him, and it turned out that he didn't even go to our university, but lived over an hour away and would travel there daily, probably to watch or obsess over which girl he could find on Facebook next. He told her he was born in America and never had been to Japan, yet he told me he was Japanese and had studied in Canada, so who knows how much of what he actually said to anyone was true. I felt a bit freaked out by this, but tried not to let it bother me. I had never seen him around, and I'd blocked him, so I forgot about it. And that was until a week or two later. I received a message from him on Facebook on another account saying how he'd seen me that day at school. This shook me up a bit, since I hadn't even considered that he might actually be watching me. I ignored the message and again blocked the account. A few days later, I got numerous messages from different accounts claiming to be Nico's friends, saying how he had his account hacked, and could I please unblock him so he could explain and we could talk it over. I ignored these messages too, but I kept receiving more, all of which I'm pretty sure were just Nico himself trying to reach out to me to get my attention. And the more I ignored them, the more violent and aggressive the messages became, and I could tell that most of the time when he said he'd seen me, he was lying. He'd say things like, "I saw you today at the library all day, you fucking slut. You're a fucking four-eyed slut who can't get laid," and other messages to that extent. I knew he was clutching at straws because I never used the school's library to study, and although I wore glasses, I never wear them in public. So I just kept blocking the accounts and tried not to let it bother me. I figured he'd get bored of me soon enough and let it go. That is, until one day after classes had finished, and I was browsing the small convenience store in the building to grab a drink on the way home. I opened up the fridge to get a bottle of water, and when I closed the door, he was literally standing right beside me. He didn't say anything. He was just staring at me. I hadn't seen him in person before, because I'd never agreed to meet with him, but I knew straight away this was him, and I freaked out. I dropped the bottle and I just left the store. I didn't walk home because I was afraid he'd follow me and find out where I lived, so I just went back into school and stayed around areas where there were lots of people until a friend of mine came to meet me. After that, I saw him a handful of times when I'd leave class. He'd just be standing there, doing nothing in particular, watching people as they walked past, and he'd stare at me intently. I made sure to always be with friends when I went to and from class, and didn't go anywhere alone for a while. But after a week or so, the messages finally stopped, and I didn't see him again. The last time I heard from him was about a year ago, when he messaged me on yet a new Facebook account, asking me if we could be friends again, because he'd changed and it was all a joke. Needless to say, I ignored the messages, blocked the account, and will not be taking up his offer on being friends. Okay, so this all happened a few years ago, and only stopped about 4 months ago. I feel like enough time has passed to justify talking about it, considering the depths this guy went to trying to get a hold of me. It all started around late 2013, when I still attended these sad, if somewhat fun, meetups that were organized through Tumblr and the like. Teenagers aged 13 to 19ish would meet up and smoke and drink, and generally just be social as hell. Everyone would wear awesome clothes, and considering that I grew up in Britain, there would often be a range of cultures and underground fashion type cliques and groups there, such as punks, decor girls, etc. It all went well, and between squat raves and these meetups, my young bored self was pretty content. I had briefly ran away from home during this time, and stayed either in my grandparents' flat, on a random sofa somewhere, or just walked around London all night. This gave rise to other creepy encounters I'll talk about sometime. Generally speaking, I'm a pretty intimidating looking guy. I'm 6'4", and had most of my hair shaved off into a mohawk at the time when this took place. Anyway, one day, when I was at one of these meetups, my friend Moonshine handed me a bottle of homemade booze and told me to come over and say hello to his friend. And generally speaking, I'm pretty social, so I thought this was okay. I wander over, and to my 16-year-old surprise, this guy looks much older, about 22 or 23, and has a totally shaved head and this kind of deadly black rubbed out stain under both of his eyes. We get to talking for a while, and he told me his name, and that he worked closely with the BBC. We ended up talking about the media industry, and one of the best places to go for media work would be. And generally, I felt like my first impressions of him were wrong. So after about 15 to 20 minutes of casual conversation and weird Russian cigarettes, we all decide to go chill in the Macy's next door, wherein I take out my diary and make a note of how I feel and what I'm doing. Note, I'm keeping a diary for some reason at this point in my life, probably some stupid teenage thing. I don't remember why really. So anyway, I get it out, and he zones in like, "What is that? Do you write? Can I read it?" And I felt very uncomfortable. I let him flick through it though. He then said something about how he felt we had a communicative connection, and gave me this look like he'd found some sort of gold mine. Needless to say, I wished the book back off of him, and sit next to my friend Moonshine for the rest of the meal. Before I leave though, I stupidly agreed to exchanging Facebooks. I thought, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? My friend vouches for him, and says he's cool, so I see no issue here. Later that night, I find a stranger to give me some cigarettes, and then I wander home and don't think about it for another 2 months. This is when it gets really weird. He likes every single one of my photos on Facebook, and messages me to say how rare it is to meet someone so beautiful. I don't know how to respond, but I didn't assume he was talking about how I looked, and was just trying to say something about how I behaved or my personality or something, which even then I found pretty excessive. After a while he starts making small talk, and hinting here and there that he's into kink, which, considering I'm already uncomfortable around him, makes me feel even more And then, one day, he messages me out of the blue to tell me about all of his fetishes, and how he wants to tie me up in a leather coffin suit and piss on me. Suddenly alarm bells and sirens and red flags and everything just go off at once, but I try to give it as much benefit of the doubt as one can brush off. I tell him I'm not really interested, and that seems to put him into a really shitty mood. I forgot to mention that I Skype a lot, so if I talk to people online, it's usually through Skype. One time when I was Skyping, this guy told me that he was home at his apartment after a huge party, which seemed pretty normal for a 23-year-old. But then he started having an off-camera conversation with his mother, which didn't quite seem to match up with his supposed media high life. Anyway, I stopped Skyping him after the piss and leather incident, but he keeps messaging me. A lot. Almost to the point that, without replying at all, I'm getting 20 to 30 random messages a day asking me all kinds of questions about where I live and what I do. One day, he reveals to me that he's written me something, which I'm surprised by, so I actually read it. It's a 3-page long detailed description of me sitting at a cafe and smoking a cigarette that previous morning, with a bunch of random sexualized content attached to it. Normally I just brush it off, but it was about me at a cafe in London that he obviously waited for me at, just so he could watch me. At this point, I decide that enough is enough, and I get him off of my social media. My friend Moonshine got a hold of me a few weeks later to tell me that he'd been writing a blog about me, with detailed sexual fantasies involving my bodily affluence and other various forms of restraint. I've since had all lines of communication blocked, and ensured that even if he wanted to, he couldn't communicate with me, or know where I am. His friend also gave him the bollocking of a lifetime, and basically taught him about the concept of stalking, and why his behavior was fucked up. I was mindlessly browsing Facebook one day, when I received a message in my inbox. Clicking on it, I realize it's from someone I don't know. His name is Peter, and he sent me this.
Hi. I was taken back by how beautiful you are in your picture. I hope you don't find that too forward. I saw you post on insert local company's name here, wall, and I thought your comment was pretty funny. I couldn't resist clicking on your profile and messaging you. Your sense of humor is just like mine, and I'd like to thank you for making me laugh today. I just lost my mother a few months ago, and I've had a hard time with it. I can't remember the last time I even smiled, let alone laughed. So thank you.
Now normally, I don't reply to messages from people I don't know, but I felt bad for this guy. I thanked him and told him I was sorry for his loss, and that I was glad I made him laugh. But once he sent me a friend request, I had to let him know that I didn't have any intention of adding him, as I only use Facebook for people I know. He said he understood, and we said our goodbyes. So one day, About a week after his initial message, I was out shopping at the local grocery store nearby my home, and I noticed a guy looking at me from a few feet away in the aisle I was in. I looked and smiled nervously, as I'm somewhat shy and socially awkward, and he smiled back and then looked at what was in front of him. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place my finger on it. I checked out my groceries and went home, and after putting all my groceries away, I sit down and log into Facebook to see I have a message. It was from him.
I liked the dress you wore today. It fits your body nicely. Thanks for smiling at me. It made me feel special.
I didn't realize it was him at the store, but seeing his picture again on Facebook definitely matched the guy in the store. I was sort of sketched out by this, but it could have just been a coincidence. I chose not to reply just to be safe. About another week goes by, and I haven't heard from that guy again. I was out with some friends at night at a park, just hanging out on the swings like we did when we were teenagers, when I noticed someone in the distance. They were walking towards the park. My friends and I got kind of spooked and went quiet. I realized when the person was close enough that it was Peter. I tell my friends in a quiet voice, "Don't panic, act natural, but we need to leave now. Get in the car." They didn't argue, and we all got in the car and drove away. Peter was gone. I told my friends who it was and what had been going on. They told me I was just being paranoid. Then, I got a message on Facebook again, and it was from him.
So, do you go to the park often?
I noped the fuck out and replied with this: "Do not message me ever again. My boyfriend is aware of the situation, and he's a police officer. Leave me alone." I blocked him, and even though I made up the boyfriend thing to scare him, it must have worked, because I haven't heard from him or seen him again in months. I live with 3 people who all know what he looks like and know about the situation, so they keep a lookout and nothing suspicious has happened. But that doesn't mean I don't look over my shoulder every now and then. Hey guys, what's up? It's Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a comment below, leave a like, or perhaps share it if you feel so inclined. If you have any particular stories you'd like me to read, or any stories that you'd like to send in, links to my social media will be in the description below. That is my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on there, and I'll try to read your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please feel free to include in the tagline what the story is about and how you would like to be credited when I list your credits in the description of the video it's featured in. If you have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.